Hi, this is Joe from Thunk Tank Podcast. Thanks for joining me again here today. So, I just wanted to make a quick follow-up video to one of my previous videos in which I analyzed the arguments of an opinion article that was published in the Guardian paper shortly after SpaceX's Falcon Heavy test launch. So, if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it in the description so you can go back and take a look. Basically, that opinion piece really just kind of bashed and tried to discredit what Elon Musk and SpaceX was doing with that test launch. It essentially characterized it as, the crazy kind of machinations of a megalomaniac billionaire looking just to launch his car into space. And of course, as we went through that argument, we saw that that was, clearly not the case. But today I found another article in The Guardian, and it was just kind of confusing to me because I don't think this is an opinion piece. I think it's just a regular news piece, but it kind of follows the same vibe of that opinion piece in terms of trying to discredit or mischaracterize what SpaceX is doing and sort of why they're doing it. So I was thinking to just go through and take a look at what the argument actually is here. And again, why this is not a very comprehensive argument, or it's certainly seemingly a disingenuous argument for a couple of reasons. So let's take a look here. So, for starters, this article spends the first few paragraphs more or less simply bashing the whole launch. You see, it describes the car in very negative language and using very negative imagery. And, particularly this middle paragraph. It says, the photograph was beamed down to earth courtesy of Elon Musk's ego, bravado, and taste for the absurd. It is human folly and genius rolled into one, a picture that sums up 2018 so far. Life on Earth feels precarious, so we look to the stars. Yeah, I mean, if you want to feel that way about this, but again, as per my issues with the other article, that's kind of missing the point here. And just to reiterate, the whole point of this test launch is to test a rocket that has never been used before. Again, I'm not going to go into the specifics because I do in my other video, but this, just to briefly sum up again, was a test launch. And with test launches, you, as Elon Musk himself said, which also wasn't cited in either article, you launch a dummy payload, what's called a dummy payload. And oftentimes that might be something as meaningless as a brick of concrete. So yes, did he choose to launch his car for PR attention and all that sort of media hype? Of course, but it's not like they were going to launch anything of value to begin with. This was a data collecting mission. He did succeed in getting his rocket and the car into space, which I still think is pretty damn cool. Obviously these writers don't, but the whole point of the mission was to collect data and make sure that this actually works, so that when they do, send supplies and satellites and eventually humans to places like the International Space Station starting out, that it's safe and that it works. So this article and the other article just kind of totally ignore that point. They totally overlook that point. And I don't quite understand the purpose of this type of mischaracterization. I don't understand what the rhetorical goal really is, other than just sort of sensing that this is almost like a backlash against this type of progress and innovation and, seemingly the imagination and inventiveness of it. Now, this is not to say that Elon Musk isn't a megalomaniac, evil billionaire, but I just think if you want to make that argument, there are much better points of data you can look to. He recently did this sale for his boring company of something like 20,000 flamethrowers to the public that he just sold, and that was a much bigger deal seemingly than launching a car into space. I know a legislator in California was trying to block the sale or sue SpaceX or something like that due to the wildfire epidemic that they had this previous summer. So yeah, moves like that seem far more evil billionaire than this, which again was a data collecting mission, and it did certainly collect valuable data for future launches. So I just think you can't decide that somebody's not who you want them to be, or a company or companies that he controls aren't maybe what you want to be, or extensions of that assessment of him, and try to mischaracterize the whole operation or all the operations in that light. think you want to call out evil billionaire-ishness where you see it. And this certainly doesn't seem to be the case. In fact, SpaceX is actually planning on launching 2 test satellites, I think maybe later this week or in the coming weeks, with the goal eventually within the decade, I think, to launch thousands more and start providing global satellite internet. So they're doing not just, sending cars into space, but very tangible innovations that, again, besides trying to go to Mars, can really help us down here on the ground, I think. But all of this is ignored in articles like these. I will say, to its credit, this article at least does actually a pretty good job explaining the science and summarizing it. It has, a graph here, you see, not a graph, an image explaining how the rocket actually works, and it does point out how its, purpose is to save money. But any commentary about it is kind of spun with this angle of, this is a misguided mission in terms of the person in control here. You see later on, there's this section where they ask a more worthy payload. And it mentions Musk is not without his critics. Many wondered what the point of the expensive stunt was. Should the most powerful rocket of our age not have carried a more useful, worthy payload? It goes on to say, either way, the plan worked and put SpaceX far at the front of the commercial space race. That's really disingenuous to ask a question like that without giving the actual answer, which, as I've said, is the fact that this is a test launch. So not naming these critics, not explaining what the answer to that question actually is, I really don't understand the point that's trying to be made here, other than to just be negative and be counterproductive and not try to, answer some very real questions that you want to ask a private space company. Again, I don't think anybody should look at a company like SpaceX and just give them free reign over, anything they want to do in space. And these are questions that are going to come up in the next few years, really, starting with commercial space flight and starting even to go out to the moon and Mars and asteroids, and whether that's mining or just exploration or other types of human advancement. These are questions we need to start addressing in terms of who owns what, who controls what, who has rights over what in space. And maybe that's sort of what the reaction is here on a slightly unconscious level. It's kind of a backlash or, a subconscious reaction against that idea, because it is uncomfortable. But I think presenting the whole situation in this light of, well, we just shouldn't be doing this because it's a waste, that misses the point, and that doesn't ask much better questions like those. So yeah, I would just say to read through articles like this before you come to a conclusion yourself. And I think that's sort of the problem with articles like these. A lot of people, they see these headlines or they read, the first paragraph or something like that, and they never quite get to the real facts and information behind a topic. So I just wanted to point out what I've come to learn about this through my own research. So I will include all of that in the descriptions below. And if I got anything wrong or anybody else has anything to say different or in addition to what I've said, please comment in the comments section below. I'd love to know what you think. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Also, for the record, speaking of evil geniuses and evil villains or supervillains, I'm not entirely convinced that that spacesuit in that Tesla Roadster that's now going into deep space for billions of years doesn't, in fact, include a human body that an evil billionaire would want to get rid of. That actually did come up on the podcast where I forget who, but one of our fellow podcasters argued that, well, if you're an evil billionaire, you probably have the resources to just dispose of a body in any way you want. You don't need to launch into space. But my point was that Elon Musk is not an evil billionaire. He is a evil villain who happens to be a billionaire, which I think is a distinct difference. But, honestly, obviously, I'm only kidding. Or am I? I think somebody should check out what's really in that car.